They weren't the kind of killers you'd expect, not lurking in shadows, not hiding behind masks. They smiled sweetly, served home-cooked meals, wore pearls and pastels. But beneath the calm exterior hid a cold-blooded evil. These women didn't just kill, they orchestrated horror. They manipulated, tortured, and betrayed, all while hiding behind a mask of charm or maternal warmth. From gas chambers to last meals, whispered final words to public shock. These are the most ruthless female killers ever executed in California. Elizabeth Ann Duncan. To the outside world, Elizabeth Duncan might have seemed like just another doting mother, but behind that facade was a woman so possessive, so dangerously obsessed with her son, that she orchestrated one of the most cold-blooded crimes California had ever seen. And in the end, it cost her everything. Born Hazel Lucille Sinclair, nigh on April 16, 1904, in Kansas City, Missouri, Elizabeth's life was messy long before it turned murderous. She changed her name, cycled through 10 marriages, and found herself on the wrong side of the law more than once. She was arrested for running a brothel in San Francisco and later for passing bad checks. She had 4 children in total, but only one truly mattered to her, Frank. Her daughter Patricia died at just 15. But Frank was her everything. Elizabeth and Frank lived together in Santa Barbara, and she clung to him like a lifeline. So when Frank, a young attorney, started dating Olga Kupchik, a nurse he met while Elizabeth was recovering from a suicide attempt, Elizabeth spiraled. When Frank and Olga got married on June 20th, 1958, Elizabeth wasn't just unhappy, she was furious. She harassed Olga at work, stalked her, and drove her to move multiple times just to get away. In court, Elizabeth admitted she'd even tried to kidnap her own son, hoping to talk some sense into him. Her words were, "I didn't want to lose Frankie. I couldn't stand life alone." The newlyweds separated just 2 weeks after their wedding, but that wasn't enough for Elizabeth. In November 1958, Olga disappeared. Suspicion quickly fell on Elizabeth, especially after police discovered something bizarre. She had tried to illegally annul the marriage by hiring a man to pose as Frank and posing as Olga herself. The truth would only get more horrifying. Weeks later, the police found Olga's body buried in a shallow grave off Casitas Pass in Carpinteria. She'd been 7 months pregnant. 2 young men, Agustin Baldonado and Luis Moya, both 24 and 23 at the time, confessed to the killing. They claimed Elizabeth had offered them $6,000 to murder her daughter-in-law. According to their account, they had kidnapped Olga, beat her, strangled her, and buried her in the dark. There was even speculation that Olga may have still been alive when she was buried. Frank, shockingly, helped lower his mother's bail from $50,000 to $5,000. But once she was released, he vanished. Meanwhile, Olga's father, Elias Kupchik, came all the way from Canada to collect his daughter's remains, only to find he couldn't, legally, until Frank, the next of kin, reappeared. Elizabeth's trial began on February 24, 1959. She claimed she was the victim of blackmail and insisted that Baldonado and Moya were trying to extort her. Her defense team even floated the idea that Olga had been kidnapped for ransom, but the jury didn't buy it. On March 16, 1959, after just under 5 hours of deliberation, Elizabeth Duncan was found guilty of the first-degree murder. 4 days later, she was sentenced to death. Her son Frank, along with a team of attorneys, including Bert M. Henson, fought hard through the appeals process. Henson also represented both Baldonado and Moya. Even Governor Pat Brown, a known opponent of the death penalty, let the executions proceed. Elizabeth Duncan never stopped fighting to save her own life. Up until her final moments, Frank continued pleading for clemency on her behalf. But it wasn't enough. On August 8, 1962, Elizabeth Duncan, Augustine Baldonado, and Luis Moya were executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison. It was the last triple execution in California history, and Elizabeth became the last woman executed in the state before the U.S. Supreme Court's Furman v. Georgia ruling put a halt to the death penalty nationwide. Her last meal was simple: a steak and a salad. Her last words were, "I am innocent. Where is Frank?" She died with her son's name on her lips. And what happened to Frank Duncan, you may ask? The story didn't end with the gas chamber. Frank Duncan, the son at the center of it all, lived on for decades. But in 2023, now in his 90s, he was finally disbarred by the state of California after a series of disciplinary actions that followed him late into life. Barbara Graham. Barbara Elaine Bonney. Wood Graham was an American criminal executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin, alongside accomplices Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins for the robbery and murder of elderly widow Mabel Monahan. Dubbed Bloody Babs by the press, she was the third woman in California executed by gas. Her life and execution were loosely portrayed in the 1958 film I Want to Live. She was born in Oakland, California, to Hortense Ford, a teenage sex worker. After Hortense was sent to reform school, Barbara was placed in foster care, where she reported abuse. Raised by strangers and extended family, Barbara was intelligent but had little formal education. As a teen, she was arrested for vagrancy and sent to Ventura State School for Girls, where her mother had also been confined. She married Harry Kielhamer in 1940 and had 2 sons, but lost custody after their divorce. 2 more failed marriages followed. During World War II, she entered sex work, operating near naval bases and working for brothel Madam Sally Stanford. She was arrested on vice charges and became involved with gambling and drugs. Barbara served 5 years for perjury after providing a false alibi. After her release, she moved to Los Angeles, resumed sex work, and married Henry Graham, with whom she had a 3rd child, Tommy. In 1953, Barbara Graham became involved with criminals Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins through her husband, Henry Graham, a drug addict and petty criminal. Perkins told Barbara about Mabel Monahan, a 64-year-old widow in Burbank, who was rumored to have $100,000 in cash and jewelry hidden in her home. On March 9, 1953, Graham lured Monahan to open her front door by pretending she needed to use the phone. Once inside, the gang, including Graham, Perkins, Santo, John True, and Baxter Shorter, searched the house, but found nothing. According to testimony, Monahan was gagged and assaulted during the robbery attempt. She was found dead 2 days later. Baxter Shorter, a safe cracker, later confessed to witnessing the crime. His testimony was leaked, and he was kidnapped and murdered by Perkins and Santo. William Upshaw, another criminal, confirmed the group had planned the robbery the night before. John True turned state's witness in exchange for immunity. Barbara Graham ruined her own defense by attempting to buy a false alibi from an undercover officer. Caught on tape admitting she was at the crime scene, she destroyed any remaining credibility. This is when the press labeled her Bloody Babs. Graham, Santo, and Perkins were convicted and sentenced to death. After failed appeals, Graham was executed by gas chamber on June 3, 1955. Her final words were, "Good people are always so sure they're right." When advised to inhale deeply, she snapped, "How the hell would you know?" She was only 31 years old and was reportedly buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery in San Rafael. Evelita Juanita Spinelli. Evelita Juanita Spinelli, born on October 17, 1889, was a career criminal, gang leader, and former wrestler who became the first woman ever executed by the state of California. Known by the nickname the Duchess, Spinelli earned a fearsome reputation in the criminal underworld. According to FBI profiler Candice DeLong, she was a stone-cold psychopath who manipulated everyone around her purely for personal gain. Her criminal activities began in Detroit, where she reportedly ran with the infamous Purple Gang, a violent mob deeply involved in bootlegging and racketeering during Prohibition. After fleeing Detroit, Spinelli settled in San Francisco and began assembling a gang of young, delinquent men, many of whom were homeless. She offered them food, shelter, and a small weekly allowance of $10, but in return, she trained them to commit crimes for her benefit, taking the majority of their illegal earnings. Her daughter, Lorraine, nicknamed Gypsy, was also involved, using her looks to lure drunk or vulnerable men into traps where they were robbed by the gang. Spinelli's downfall began with the murder of a man named Leland Cash during a robbery gone wrong on April 8th. In the year 1940, Cash, who was deaf, didn't hear the gang's order to raise his hands and was shot in the stomach by Spinelli's protégés, Albert Ives and Raymond Sherrod. Fearing that Sherrod would talk to police, Spinelli poisoned him with whiskey laced with chloral hydrate, then had the gang beat him unconscious. They dumped his body off the Clarksburg Bridge dressed only in swim trunks, hoping it would look like an accidental drowning, but the autopsy revealed no water in his lungs, which was proof he was dead before hitting the water. Fearing he might be next, Ives confessed and was later institutionalized. Spinelli was arrested after ballistics linked the bullet that killed Cash to a gun she owned. Her own gang members, including Ives, turned on her and testified during the trial. Spinelli, along with Mike Simeone and Gordon Hawkins, was found guilty on May 30th, 1941. All three appealed their convictions, but their appeals were rejected. Clinton Duffy, the warden of San Quentin, described Spinelli as the coldest, hardest character, male or female, I have ever known. A homely, scrawny, nearsighted, sharp-featured scarecrow, evil as a witch, horrible to look at, impossible to like. Her presence left a chilling impression, even on hardened prison officials. Evelita Juanita Spinelli didn't go to her death quietly. Her execution was anything but swift. First, California Governor Culbert Olson delayed it for a full 30 days. Then came 2 more last-minute reprieves. But none of it mattered in the end. On November 21st, 1941, Spinelli became the first woman ever executed by the state of California, gassed to death at San Quentin Prison. She was 52 years old. Even in her final hours, Spinelli showed no remorse. There were no dramatic breakdowns, no final pleas, no emotional last words, just a request for a simple last meal, turkey meat and a hamburger. And when it was time, she was led to the gas chamber, reportedly calm and cold, true to the hard-hearted persona she carried her entire life. Exactly 1 week later, her 2 right-hand men, Mike Simeone, who was also her common-law husband, and Gordon Hawkins, followed her into the same gas chamber. The deadly trio, who once ruled a violent underground criminal empire, had all met the same fate. But the story didn't end there. Spinelli's twisted tale of manipulation, crime, and murder caught the attention of the public and Hollywood. Her life and crimes were dramatized in the classic TV crime show Gangbusters, in an episode fittingly titled The Duchess Spinelli Case. It was the kind of story that stuck with people, not just because of what she did, but because of who she was, a ruthless, unrepentant woman who used others like pawns and killed them without blinking. Dorothea Puente. At first glance, Dorothea Puente looked like any sweet old landlady. Gray hair, big glasses, soft smile. But behind the doors of her Sacramento boarding house, a horror story was unfolding. Born on January 9, 1929 in Redlands, California, Dorothea had a rough start. Her parents were alcoholics. Her dad died when she was a child, and her mother lost custody before dying in a motorcycle accident. Orphaned young, Dorothea ended up in an orphanage where she was abused. It was a traumatic beginning, but what followed was far darker. By age 16, she married a soldier, had 2 daughters, gave both away, and was arrested for forging checks. That marriage ended quickly. In 1952, she married again, this time creating a fake identity as a Muslim woman named Tea Singwala Nayarda. Her husband was often away at sea, and while he was gone, she gambled and entertained other men. In the year 1960, she was caught running a brothel disguised as a bookkeeping firm. The next year, after a series of breakdowns and lies, she was diagnosed as a pathological liar with an unstable personality. By the mid-60s, she reinvented herself again, this time as a Christian caregiver named Sharon Johansson. She offered shelter to vulnerable women and posed as a pillar of the community. Soon, this kind landlady would earn a chilling new nickname, the Death House Landlady, a serial killer who preyed on the people she claimed to help. After another failed marriage in the late 60s, Dorothea Puente settled into Sacramento, reinventing herself as a kind, church-going landlady. She opened a boarding house for the elderly and mentally ill, ran Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, helped people apply for benefits, and dressed the part of a sweet, grandmotherly caretaker. But behind that gentle smile was a cold, calculating killer. In 1978, she was caught stealing checks from her tenants. Then in 1982, she drugged and robbed an elderly man she met at a bar. And just weeks later, her tenant Ruth Monroe died under suspicious circumstances. That same year, another woman accused Puente of drugging her and stealing her things. She was arrested for grand theft and sent to prison. There, she began writing to a 77-year-old retiree named Everson Gilmouth. When she was released, Gilmouth came to pick her up. He never left. Months later, his body was found stuffed in a box near a river, while Puente continued cashing his checks and writing fake letters to his sister. Between 1985 to 1988, more tenants vanished. Betty Palmer, Leona Carpenter, James Gallup, Vera Martin, Dorothy Miller, and Alvaro Montoya, among others. Each one died quietly, their social security checks rerouted, their names erased, until their bodies were discovered buried in Puente's backyard. Her last known victim, Benjamin Fink, disappeared just after Dorothea had a concrete slab poured in her yard. By the end, 9 bodies were unearthed at her home. The help she gave vulnerable people was just a front for murder and fraud. And now, the truth was out. The Death House landlady's secrets were buried no longer. By November 1988, the web Dorothea Puente had spun around her victims was beginning to unravel. It all started when John Sharp, a former resident, was questioned about the disappearance of Alvaro Montoya. At first, he claimed he'd seen Montoya recently, but when police weren't looking, he slipped them a note that read, "She wants me to lie to you." That note blew the case wide open. Just days later, on November 11th, detectives returned to Puente's Sacramento home. She gave permission to search the yard. Within 30 minutes, they uncovered the first body, and while police were still digging, Dorothea simply vanished. An all-points bulletin went out across the state. 3 days later, a sharp-eyed man in Los Angeles recognized her from the news. She was using the name Donna Johansson and hiding out in a motel. He contacted a CBS reporter who helped bring the tip to police. Finally, on November 16, 1988, the Death House landlady was arrested. Back in Sacramento, Puente was charged with 9 counts of murder. Prosecutors described how she drugged her tenants, wrapped them in bedsheets and plastic, and buried them in shallow graves, all while continuing to cash their Social Security checks. The case dragged on for years. It took nearly 5 years to go to trial. By then, the evidence had piled sky high. Over 150 witnesses, more than 3,000 exhibits, and 22,000 pages of testimony. After a lengthy trial and 11 days of deliberation, the jury was deadlocked on all counts. The judge urged them to keep going. Finally, on August 26, 1993, Dorothea Puente was convicted of 3 murders of Leona Carpenter, Dorothy Miller, and Benjamin Fink. The jury couldn't agree on the other 6. She was spared the death penalty, but on December 10, 1993, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Puente filed appeals, but none were successful. Dorothea Puente spent her final years at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. She died there on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82 from natural causes. She never showed remorse, and to the very end, she insisted she was just a misunderstood caretaker. But the backyard at 1426 F Street told a different story. These women didn't just kill, they manipulated, planned, and murdered without remorse. Their executions brought closure to some, but not enough to undo the terror they left behind. We are left to ask, what could have happened if they were spared by the justice system? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.